of the Sociology Department at Seashore Hall, University of Iowa. We're here to visit with Carl Couch, room W129. Yes. Carl. This is Professor Carl Couch.
What am I supposed to do now?
It's great.
We're all relaxed, Joe.
Yeah. Morning, Carl.
Good morning, Joe.
Well, we have a number of questions we'd like to ask you today, and primarily at first we're interested in how do you account for becoming a sociologist?
I don't know. I really don't. When I started, when I was an undergraduate, I investigated a number of different majors, everything from journalism to physics, and I finally settled on sociology because they called me over to Jessup Hall one day and told me I had to have a major if I was going to graduate. And the only way I could graduate, when I planned to graduate with a BA degree, was by taking, I think, 17 hours, I'm not sure, 15 or 17 hours of sociology my last semester. That experience convinced me that sociology was an exceedingly ethnocentric intellectual discipline, and I decided to go to graduate school in anthropology.
Just to backtrack a little bit, where were you born, and how did your upbringing contribute to this?
I was born in northwest Iowa, quite poor background, and went in the military in 1943, discharged in late 1945. Had so-called intellectual or academic interest as a high school kid, and wanted to go to college, but never got around to it. It wasn't until 1948 that I decided to go to college. By the time I was married and had a kid. And I had no idea as to what I was going to major in. I just knew that you went to college, you could read books, and I like to read books. So when I came down here and I found out that if you got a PhD, they'd let you stay on the faculty. So I decided I'd get a PhD. I didn't know what I'd get one. And then I sort of drifted into sociology, I guess.
Were there any specific circumstances that contributed to your commitment to pursue sociology as a career?
No, not really, I don't think. You know, it was kind of a vague one of my experience in World War II, and I was really impressed, if you will, in a way with Nazism. And the thing is, as a young man, I was perhaps more intrigued with than anything else on that score was the Jews marching off to the concentration camps as directed by the Nazis. I could not comprehend that.
Did you think sociology had some means of dealing with that?
Well, I guess so. I couldn't comprehend. I couldn't visualize tens of thousands and millions of Midwestern people, farmers in particular, which my background's farm, being herded like that and willingly go walk to their deaths. You know, I just could not comprehend that. Why no revolt? You know, and that really bugged me. That really bugged me.
So that's why
still bugs me. I don't know why no revolt. You know, there was that kind of thing. And the other thing, I guess, that my own experience in the military was the what I call blind allegiance to authority, if you will. Somebody give an order, and if they had a high rank, everybody else followed it, and nobody questioned it, even if it was a stupid order, and that bugged me. And I thought, you know, to analyze the social, maybe you gotta explain those things. Hell, I don't know, here I am, 35 years later, and I still can't explain them, or 40 years later.
Those two interests piqued your experiences, piqued your interest.
Yeah, right. And if for anything, it was that, I suppose. I don't know. But in And then I was intrigued. I don't know where I picked it up, really, but I was really intrigued with the idea of a science of the social. I was really intrigued with science. When I was a high school student, I'd read Huxley's, I think it's Science of Life, mammoth damn thing. I was really impressed with that. I thought that was really quite an achievement. And I also read H.G. Wells' Outline of History when I was a high school student, and that really impressed me. I ought to go back and reread those. I'm sure they're pop statements that I would look down my nose at now, but as a 17-year-old kid, I remember being very impressed with Huxley's book and H.G. Wells' Outline of History. I became an H.G. Wells fan, as a matter of fact, on the basis of that. Which there are worse things to do than that. And then I came to the University of Iowa and I found out that there were a lot of people asking interesting questions and sat around and argued about them. I enjoyed that. Still do.
Were there any specific people who influenced your decision to become a sociologist?
Oh, I don't know anybody influenced my decision to become a sociologist, really. I became a sociologist because I had to have a major. And I had more courses in sociology at the time than anything else. And then when I finished up my BA degree, I decided to go to graduate work in anthropology, I think, as I said. And then I was influenced there by George Murdoch's books, Social Structure. And I was going to go to Yale and work with Murdoch. And I applied and been accepted and all that sort of crap. And then I took a seminar from Manfred Kuhn on symbolic interaction theory. And I'd heard of George Mead and even had a copy of his Mind, Self, and Society before that. But I don't think I had any understanding of it until after I'd taken a seminar from Manfred Kuhn. And I formed some very close friendship relationships with fellow grad students, and they influenced me, and Kuhn influenced me. But before that, I don't think there's any people influencing me in the sense of becoming a sociologist. And I don't know what got me bugged on the science of the social. I really don't. I mean, as a young man, even in high school, I was very intrigued with the research of Darwin and Mendel. I didn't understand it at that time, but I was intrigued by what they did. And I thought somebody ought to do something like that for the social. And as I got into the social science, it was apparent to me that social science had not yet had their Gregory Mendel or Charles Darwin.
So you mentioned Murdoch and Kuhn and fellow graduate students contributing to your decision. Any fellow graduate students in particular? Any experiences with them?
Yeah, well, I suppose the number one would be Bob Stewart. And then Harold Mulford, Fred Wiseman, to a lesser extent Tom McPartland. McPartland was 2 years ahead of me, and 2 years difference in graduate school is a generation, as you know. But those would be the only ones.
Any particular experiences you had with these colleagues that cemented this decision?
No, I don't think so.
General atmosphere?
Yeah, general atmosphere. It was a real inquisitive bunch. And it was taken for granted that there was going to be a science of the social. That was talked about all the time. Is such a thing as possible? Well, I left out one person. Heidi Kamada was part of that too. Heidi's influence on me was largely when I was an undergraduate. And I guess we started graduate school together, and we both got recalled in the service. He got his master's before he left here, and he didn't come back. He went to the University of Illinois, where he got his PhD, and I did not have my master's when I left here. I'd gotten a semester in the summer session, so I came back here. Well, we talked about the idea of a science of the social and what its consequences for humanity might be, let's put it that way. That was just a pervasive topic. And then once I got into graduate school, the ideas of George Herbert Mead really were very prominent, I don't know how else to say it. Not that they dominated, but certainly they were very prominent. And this was also a time, you got to remember, when there was a hell of a lot of graduate students who had been in the military in World War II. And so it's a different kind of world than normal. I'm not saying it very well, but
Different than today. So.
yeah, right. And we were older. I mean, I was 23 years old when I started undergraduate work. I was probably typical kind of thing in terms of older when you start. There's quite a difference between starting at 23 as opposed to 18.
Now, you mentioned discussing the consequences for humanity of social sciences, and we'd like to delve into that a little later, just sort of to keep on track here. If you had to start your career all over again, would you become a sociologist? Would you do something different? Would you try and do sociology in a different site in the community?
I wouldn't do a hell lot different. I don't think there's any place else to go in terms of what I wanted to do and what I still want to do than academia. I don't see it out there in the private world. I certainly don't see it out there in the governmental institutions. And the thing about academia is that those that want to pursue ideas, to do research and to theorize, you've got a pretty free hand. You've got an awful lot of autonomy. More so than most of them that are in academia realize. I mean, most of your fellow academicians don't give a damn what you teach in classrooms as long as you meet classes. And so you can teach what you feel like. Of course, that leads to all kinds of abuses, but it also gives you freedom to investigate, to experiment, to try alternative lines of thought.
The autonomy criteria.
Yeah, the autonomy criteria, And that's I just can't see doing it any place besides acting. The other alternative is to be financially independent. Have rich parents.
Carl, you mentioned this science of the social. How does that differ from sociology?
Well, certainly, in one general sense, it doesn't differ, okay? I mean, certainly when people like Durkheim were talking about sociology, they equated the two. As I use that term, what it means is trying to formulate authentic, universalistic propositions about social phenomena. And certainly when the founding fathers of sociology, that was what they were interested in. The practical difference, or the operational difference, is simply that many of the people who call themselves sociologists have a conception of human conduct, social processes, that is so restrictive that they render the possibility of a science of the social impossible. And the analogy, and like all analogies, you can't push it too far. It's like trying to build biological sciences and denying there's anything unique or distinct about life, as opposed to inorganic phenomena. And a lot of people who call themselves sociologists try to deny that there's anything distinct about social processes, that the paradigms of thought, the frame of thought that people use to deal with falling bodies is adequate for dealing with social phenomenon, and in my judgment, it obviously is not. I got far too narrow a conception.
Could you be more specific and perhaps even give an example for somebody that is just being introduced to this discipline of sociology, how they might be able to identify this sense or this difference between a science of the social and this sociology as found in textbooks and such? For
In
example,
very practical terms, if all they're talking about is techniques, if the techniques are predominant, techniques of doing research are up front, in all probability they're not doing the science of the social. They can't do the science of the social. Because most of the techniques, when people put techniques up front, that frames their way of thinking, and it also determines, I shouldn't say determine, but impacts on the very data they get, the very data they, and techniques have got to be subordinated to theory. I suppose if I was going to use criteria, that'd be that. General criteria. Are the techniques subordinated to theory? And if the techniques are not subordinated to theory, you're some kind of technician as opposed to a scientist.
and you believe that that has been an effort, a major effort in what we're calling sociology.
Oh, yeah.
How do you account for that difference?
Oh, very easily, I think. Yeah, very easily. I think old Emil Durkheim was the guilty party. He wrote a book, I don't know what the title of it was, Rules of Methodological Studies or something like that. Anyway, in there he's got a concern. He really addresses the issue. And one of the points he makes, which is rather simple but a very basic point, is that the social is ever-changing, ever-moving. I forget the phrase he uses. He talks about its ephemerality and its processional nature, if you will. And then he asks the question, my goodness, how can we build a science of that? And he says something like, we can't conceptually fix that, or mentally fix that, I think, which means you can't develop concepts to deal with process. And his answer is, what we got to do is we got to turn our attention to the study of social products or social facts. Social facts is his phrase, of course. And ever since then, most sociologists have done exactly that. I mean, they have developed methodological procedures, research procedures that attend to social facts. And facts is spelled out by Durkheim, and people who follow Durkheim has been products of the social, but not the social processes themselves. And there's a real problem here, because social life is an extremely complex thing. Durkheim knew that. Anybody who looks at it very much knows that. And so what they've done, or what a number of them have done, is they said, we got to get this thing that's static, something that's static, it's enduring, and that we can analyze. And so that's what and so we got the statistical analysis of bureaucratic and questionnaire data as the dominant mode. Now, a lot of people know that that's not substantial data. Data of any great significance. They know that. And so some of those who know that, what they do is they go out and they theorize without benefit of data. They're what I call, or what not a lot of people call word warriors or wordsmiths. They got a lot of cute phrases, but they don't have any substance either.
To kind of pursue that one more step, this science of the social, can it be organized, for example, as having something similar to a discipline like sociology? If it were to be organized, what type of training would be involved in becoming a member or a participant in a science of the social?
Well, first thing you got to do is to teach them to observe the social. That's a really difficult thing to do. It's not impossible by any means, but it's difficult. And one of the obvious things you got to do is, people got to learn how to do, is to observe social transactions. And it's a lot easier to observe your mustache than it is to observe the social transaction between you and I. One's a lot simpler than the other. Your mustache is a lot simpler. And so it requires a certain, what I call breadth of scope to observe the social. Okay? The other thing is, if social life exists in movement, in process, it's got to be observed across time. You can't take still photography and do it. Okay? And in a sense, the people who do the bureaucratic, who rely on bureaucratic records, in question of data, they take snapshots. They don't even take snapshots. It'd be better off they did take snapshots, as a matter of fact. And that data is awfully shallow. That is, and it's awfully limited. So you got to observe. The cliche I use in my class all the time. The minimum unit of analysis for a sociologist is a dyad. Two people capable of independent action, acting interdependently. This is where we start. I mean, that's the absolute minimum. And so that's a pretty complex process, or set of processes you got to look at. Then you got to add the other thing is, hey, we got to look at it across time. And DrCouch knew that, by the way. But he didn't know how you could do that. We get the technology now today, we can do that with this silly video camera right there. We can observe the social. We can get a record of the social as a processual event, and we can analyze it. Durkheim's day there was film, but I doubt he knew much about what was going on there.
Follow-up question to one that Joe and you were talking about, and that is this idea of, the best place to pursue this freedom of inquiry, at least in your estimate at that period of time, was academia. And that brings up, just the idea, the notion of freedom to inquire, brings up this business of question of accountability.
Yep.
I'd like to kind of introduce that into it by introducing a term a lot of introductory students are become familiar with, and that's this idea of role conflict. Role conflict in the sense that principles are involved here. Personal integrity and intellectual role. That can go in a lot of different directions, but
sure can.
Could you kind of expand either from personal experience or your particular philosophy on that?
It's a very complicated problem.
We've got a lot of time.
We got a lot of time. And I don't have the answers. I really don't have the answers. Certainly I believe in personal accountability. Also believe in personal autonomy, and those two things are antagonistic to one another. When you're accountable, you're no longer autonomous. When you're autonomous, you're not accountable. Certainly to do what I see as significant intellectual activity, there's got to be a fair degree of autonomy. I think probably the best way of introducing the accountability without it stifling innovative undertakings is there's got to be some kind of, quotes, public display of what the hell you are doing or what you're coming up with. A performance. There's got to be a competition of ideas, okay? Or go back to the old idea of academia being a marketplace of ideas. The ideas got to clash openly, or the people presenting ideas got to clash openly, and the ideas that went out in the long run in this public debate, if you will, this public trial, hopefully are the ones that, but obviously that doesn't always work either. And to speak from the other side of the coin for a moment, there's an awful lot of people in academia who have abused the autonomy that goes along with an academic appointment. I mean, we all know people who've got an academic appointment and then retired and became real estate agents or something like that. And in the meantime have sucked off the taxpayers or the ones that are contributing to the tithing or what have you. And I don't know how you get rid of them. Shame them out? I don't know. But certainly I don't think academia should be a place to go retire. If you don't want to play the game, you got to go get a job driving a truck or something. I don't have the answer to that now. It's a good question. I don't have the answers. Okay.
Could I ask you,
Yeah.
are we using the same term, or do we have the same meaning when we use the term, when you use the term public? Or are we talking code phrases here? When we say public, is it like just within a department?
Oh, no.
Within subsections?
No.
Out to the general
It's all
taxpayer
that.
public?
It's all that. The first test is with your peers, your friends, then it expands out. I mean, science is open. It's got to be open. Open for inspection by all. That's important. It's not open. It's going to mutate into something weird. I don't know. Sounds good anyway.
You mentioned earlier a number of different things. I'd like to see if I can get you to pull them together a little bit. You're talking about the taxpayers and accountability of academics to taxpayers. With respect to that, earlier you mentioned when method takes precedence over theory, that's where the problems are in terms of academia. Of what use is this to the taxpayer? Method theory. Are there any practical applications to sociology?
Well, hopefully, yes. Certainly, that's the ultimate test. The ultimate test of what I regard as scientific knowledge is does it allow human beings to do things they couldn't do before.
For example,
Well, blow up the world. I mean, we can do that now. We couldn't do that a few generations ago.
well, that certainly wasn't a product of sociology.
No,
the
it certainly
ability
wasn't
to
a
do that.
project of sociology.
What are some specific things that you think sociology could do?
Oh, I think sociology could do a number of things. One of the obvious things, for example, that I spent some time working on the last 20 years has been the whole business of representation, representative government. I mean, you don't have to be a great sophisticate to realize that representative government's got some glitches in it. Most people with an IQ over 82 regarded as preferable to tyranny, at least. But we also have a pretty high corruption rate in most legislative bodies. And hypothetically, at least, sociologists ought to be able to do research that locates the origin, if you will, of that corruption, and maybe bring about structural modifications. They, not sociologists, doing the latter part. Making that knowledge available so that people then can make structural modifications in state structures to at least lower, if not to minimize corruption and a few things like that. I mean, that's just one, okay. Certainly I think that, the evidence that sociologists have obtained so far clearly suggests, they have not demonstrated, but they clearly suggest that things like insanity, and let me just get away that, the crazy nuts out there, let me get away that loose phrase, is a social product. That there's something about the particular kind of social combinations that create that. A lot of nuts don't like being nuts, and the people who are related to them, have to live with them, don't like them either. And therefore, I take that as something that might be desirable to minimize, if not eradicate. Sociology, if it looked in the right place in the right way, might be able to offer something like that. I don't think right now we have anything to offer. Very little to offer, let's put it that way. Very little to offer. But I think, certainly I think it's a possibility. I mean, but see, I don't know. See, what you're asking in a sense is, and I use an analogy, okay? You're asking in a sense the kind of question that somebody might ask Gregory Mendel. Okay, so genetic information goes across generations this way and is manifested in phenotypes this particular way. What the hell's that got to do with anything? Well, that particular mode of thought is the whole basis of, modern plant and animal breeding, for God's sakes. And at least we can have 150 bushel an acre corn as opposed to 35 bushel an acre corn. Fewer people have to work the soil. I'm not sure it's good, but that's one of the consequences. Yeah, I do think it's good, by the way.
So you have an intuitive sense that it could be
the
useful
basic
in
knowledge
the
is useful. Yeah.
You mentioned in response to one of Hal's questions, that academia was a marketplace of ideas, and you've just...
I would like to see it be that.
Well, you'd like to see it be that.
I think that was the old idea, but I don't know that that's any longer the case.
Well, what is it then?
Well, it's becoming exceedingly bureaucratized, and instead of people competing with ideas, they compete with policing their authority figures, and that's something quite different. Now, supposedly those authority figures make judgments in terms of who's got the right ideas. The only problem with that is when somebody becomes the head of the department or dean and becomes an authority figure, they're incompetent to make those judgments anymore because they're not up to date to what the hell's going on in the field. But they're the ones that, in fact, make the judgment, and so we changed the rules of the game, or the rules of the game have changed from a marketplace of ideas. And not that the marketplace of ideas is completely gone, it's not. But to a certain extent, it's been supplanted in part by what I would call bureaucratic criteria, which is really quite different.
It seems then you're implying that those are the individuals making the decisions that significantly impact what's going to become available to future publics.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sure. Absolutely.
Well, you're talking about sociology or social science being a little different than what it is now. What could you compare your training as a sociologist to how it's been since that time, and perhaps suggest any possible changes that could be made to go in this direction that you...
Well, certainly if you look at it certain ways, training of current grad students in sociology is more refined, let's put it that way. Many grad students at least get a much better grasp of how to do statistics and certain procedures like that than the people of my cohort had. I mean, we were exposed to statistics, but in terms of any kind of in-depth, refined comprehension of it, we didn't have it. I don't know. So, in the sense of as technicians, I'd say they're better trained in one sense, and that we could kind of the training that I received, I don't know that it was the specifics that were all that important. One of the things that was in the forefront of the, quote, subculture of the grad students of my day, I don't think I was unique, or the grad school I went to was unique, was that whole idea of science, of humanity, the science of the social. And there's a lot of discussion of that. What the hell does that mean, and what are the implications of that? And so there was a lot of concern with this kind of broad question, if you will, how does sociology fit into the larger intellectual enterprise kind of thing. And some of us, at least, got hooked on that idea, got committed on it, you know. Which is a different kind of thing than being trained to be a good mechanic, you know. It's sort of like what's one group of people are interested in, committed to, what's an alternative mode of transportation besides the automobile and the airplane and the boats. And the others are trained into how to fix boats or automobiles. And I see the modern social science or sociology students in particular being trained in how to fix automobiles, how to fix boats. But in terms of asking the question of do we want boats or automobiles, nobody asks that question anymore. And, I think we ought to ask it once in a while at least.
What about pushing that question even further? Do we want a transportation system?
Right. Or is there an alternative transportation system? Do we want a transportation? Yeah. But see, that's a particular kind of concern, and that's the kind of concern that you can do a lot of BSing and never get anywhere, you know? You also got to marry that with the idea that you're going to try to do something, okay? And certainly that was married with you're going to try to do something. When I was a grad student, one of the things that was coming to the foreground, now it's already there, okay? It's in the foreground for every grad student. What's coming to the foreground was the whole idea of questionnaire data systematically gathered and systematically analyzed. I mean, this in the late 40s, early 50s was just really invading sociology. And so a big part of the culture was how do you use that to come up with a new sociology or a viable sociology. Let's put it that way.
Well, did a number of your colleagues who were debating this notion of how does this social work? Did they sort of grab onto this method and run with it, or did they lose the question?
We all, the ones that I was closely associated with, we all at one time were kind of intrigued with what we might loosely call statistical analysis, okay? I was, and I wasn't the only one. For example, one of the hot little items in those days was a Gutman scalegram as a way of isolating a unified variable or a variable or a unidimensional phenomenon, I think was a phrase someone was used. And I remember being intrigued with that. It had a certain logic to it, a certain system to it. And I believed it. I naively believed it when it was about the time I finished up my graduate student training. Then I went out to Montana and I gave a questionnaire to a bunch of people about their conceptions of American Indians. And I don't know quite how this happened, but I got two populations. One, people who'd never been associated with American Indians to speak of, and others that lived around Indian reservations who had a lot of contact. These are all Caucasians, of course. And I found out that the damn thing didn't scale in any kind of unified way. That made me really question what's going on here. Is there this unitary phenomenon of prejudice? And I decided it was not, and I got no scale. That contributed to my, it wasn't the only thing, but it contributed to my disenchantment with statistical techniques, if you will. And I was never, and so you also got to keep in mind that I was, and I'm talking personally here, but I was never that intrigued with statistical techniques per se. They were simply a possible instrument that might allow us to do what we wanted to do. If they don't do it, the hell with them, we'll go look for something else. Okay?
So there's no use for statistics in the social sciences.
Oh, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't go that far.
Minimal use. What sort of use
I don't
is
know
there?
what use. I don't know what, if any, use statistics are going to have in the future in social science. Certainly in applied social science, it's going to be around for a long time, and it's probably going to have something to offer. But in terms of what I would think of as theoretical social science research that is committed to the idea of formulating universalistic propositions about social phenomenon, right now I cannot see any use for statistics. I'm not saying there are none. I just don't know what the hell they are.
To push sort of deeper but in a little different direction, you just mentioned applied sociology and theoretical sociology. What is your understanding of sociology? What is sociology?
Well, trying to develop understanding, I guess, of social phenomenon, okay? Now, to be viable, I think we got to have both.
Both.
The theoretical kind of stuff, the stuff that's directed to formulating very abstract general propositions, like laws of gravity, which is a very general abstract thing, okay? On the other hand, we also got to have very practical things in terms of how to test the tensile strength of a piece of steel, you know? Certainly I think that there's a room for both in social science, don't be wrong. And my own personal commitment has always been to the theoretical side. I certainly in no sense look down my nose at people who do the so-called applied or practical sociology. That's going to be done too. We've got to do the kind of work that Mendel did to formulate that abstract general proposition about how genetic information goes across generations, okay? But then we also got to take that and say, okay, now what the hell's that got to do with, if anything, to the number of bushels of corn per acre?
Okay, a couple of follow-up questions here. The first one, though, is you mentioned that it's a study of social phenomena. What are social phenomena?
For sociologists, the practical definition is two or more people doing something in some kind of coordinated fashion, or two or more people having some kind of shared experience.
For example?
Two people walking down the sidewalk together.
Okay.
That's minimum social. You know, one person walking down the sidewalk I wouldn't regard as social. It's a social product, but it's not a social act. Okay, two of them walking down there. Then we got 116 military yokels out there marching in unison. That's social too. Okay, that's two or more.
Okay, and anything revolving around that, then you would consider to constitute a social phenomenon.
Yeah. It takes a lot of different forms.
Then the other question, then, now that you've given some sort of a definition to this, I think we'll get in a little more to this later. You mentioned your personal commitment to the theoretical side and the practical side, and I think most people would probably agree with that, but you're continually using these references to Mendel and to growing corn.
Right.
And what relationship does that have to sociology? That seems to be biology, botany.
Well, that is biology. I'm just holding that up as some.
So let's get some sociological examples here. I understand the use of metaphors and analogies is important in learning, but
well, yeah. One of the this is kind of a simple-minded thing, all right? But Barbara Sink and I did some work on interpersonal negotiating, and we formulated some very general principle about how interpersonal negotiation is pulled off or completed, how that act is completed. One of the obvious, simple observations, and after the fact doesn't seem a very profound one, is that some of these people that supposedly are negotiating, what happens is they get hooked with what happened in the past. Prototype of that is husband and wife get into an argument, and one says, "You did too do X," and the other one says, "No, I did not do X, and you did Y." And they get into this big thing about the past. It's what happened, okay? One of the obvious things is when people get hung up on the past and they're supposedly negotiating, they're not going to complete the act of negotiating. To complete the act of negotiating, you've got to project an alternative future. You've got to be... Now, it seems to me that that simple but rather basic idea could be taught to people in everything from introductory sociology to high school level to family counseling centers to international relationships, and make negotiating a little more effective than it sometimes is.
So there's a specific applied
Yeah,
use
that's
of
right,
sociology.
Now, when Barb Sink and I were doing that work, we were not interested in applied. We say, what are the basic component parts of interpersonal negotiation? Well, the phrase we used was, what are the elements of association that create the form of activity we call interpersonal negotiating? And that was our concern, and that I see as a theoretical concern. This other thing I've been talking about is a practical concern that I think flows from that. I think the same sort of thing can be said about, for example, the work I did with Marion Weiland on representative relationships, representative constituent relationships. We were intrigued with the fact that this representative relationship was asymmetrical, but it certainly was not like authority. And we were trying to find out what were the component parts. I'm not sure we even did that, but once you find that, then it seems to me you can take those general ideas, you can look at the representative constituent relationship and say, hey, given that, how can we make this thing work in a manner that is a little more pleasing and satisfactory and exciting to those that are involved? I don't know, some damn thing like that.
Yeah, well, that's addressing the theoretical and the practical side.
Right.
You've mentioned Sink and Wayland and some other former students. Are there any other people that you've had minimal association with who are doing sociology?
Oh, yeah.
Such as, what are they doing? Who are they?
There's a lot of them trying, okay? I don't... I think the work that Anselm Strauss has done over the years is some real good stuff. The awareness context stuff, his general ideas that he's popularized about grounded theory, I'm in great sympathy with. A particular one that's impressed me over the years is an old one done 30-some years ago now by Edwin Leonard on dynamics of exclusion, paranoia. That's good work. My friend Norm Denson is casting about trying to do things. Norm gets kind of crazy at times, but he's got bright ideas. And certainly his observations about becoming an alcoholic and becoming a recovering alcoholic are, I think, have both theoretical and practical implications that we don't understand very well yet. But and there's others.
You seem to be talking about people who come from similar theoretical orientations. How about people, say, like Karl Marx, Max Weber?
Well, certainly people like Karl Marx and Max Weber certainly ask the big questions. Is the science of the social possible, and how might we go about doing it? They made what I call the grand effort. So did a lot of other people, Freud, for example. And I suppose take Karl Marx or Marxian thought. I'm not sure I think of Marxian thought really as a social science or a dimension of social science today. And I know that's offensive to some of them. But it seems to me that most of the so-called Marxists or neo-Marxists, they want to play word games. They want to be word warriors. They want to attack one another and prove how stupid one another is.
Well, what do you mean by that? It does seem that there is some merit to Marx's notion that there are some structural inequalities that exist in
Of course,
even contemporary society.
Of course.
What do you mean? They're attacking each other's ideas. What do you mean by that? For instance,
you don't understand Karl Marx like I understand Karl Marx. That's or you don't understand him properly.
okay.
But the point I want to get to is they don't go out and confront the empirical world of human beings mucking one another over. They don't go out there and systematically observe that.
So were they out there systematically observing structural
bringing that back to
inequalities?
bear on so-called Marxian formulations, then I would say yeah. But very few Marxists will get their hands dirty with data. I assume there's somebody out there that calls themselves a Marxist, except that's no longer an accepted term. Now they call themselves conflict theorists. And then the other thing, of course, is that you've simply got to recognize that in terms of the human condition, Marx made one real fundamental error. And namely, he saw asymmetric exploitative relationships as being the foundation of complex societies. And certainly if you look at human societies, complex human societies, there's some merit to that observation. But that is really it's not accurate. I mean, the fundamental human act is a cooperative act. This doesn't mean people don't muck each other over and conflict and all that kind of thing. But without the cooperative act being the prevailing act within a group or society, they ain't got no society. And the Marxists don't know that. It's not, in one sense, it's not a very profound act, but it's a pretty damn basic, profound idea. It's a pretty basic idea. They got to find that out someday.
So you need to cooperate to sustain conflict.
Right, you sure do. You can have short-lived conflict without cooperation. I can sneak up behind you in a back alley and stab you in the guts, and then you can turn around and try to stab me. But if there's no cooperation involved at all, it ain't going to last very long. One of them's going to be dead, or the other's going to flee, or something.
I'd like to move into the area that's commonly taught and talked about called symbolic interaction.
All right.
All right. The term has been attributed to Herbert Blumer in 1939, but basically seems to include studies of social behavior, also a whole range of topics. Basically, it's the face-to-face situation.
Yeah.
Over and over again, or at least something that we can identify as micro-interaction. You pretty much agree with that in the use of that term.
Yeah, and yes, in use, that's a common conception of it. That's a common way it's been used out there for the last many years, yes.
But it does cover and gloss on some basic differences in approaches to micro-interaction, most specifically between Blumer's style and your style, the couch style.
Yeah.
Blumer's micro-interaction was focus on action, but do not affect the activity under study. That seems to have disagreed somewhat with Mead, because Mead stated, go out, focus on social relationships, and cause things to happen. Do you have some thoughts on that? That's been brought up over and over again in the history.
Yeah, well, first, they're not mutually exclusive, okay?
Okay.
And Blumer, as you know, was a great advocate, and I say the great advocate, not a, but the great advocate, of naturalistic observation. You go out there and you leave things as they are and you observe them and you try to formulate some general principles. And I don't know where, but at least on occasion, he held up Charles Darwin as his role model, if you will. I know his personal role model, but he referred to Darwin as being the prototypical scientist who did naturalistic observation. And most of the followers of Bloomer, in the sense that they may not be followers of Bloomer, but followers of this naturalistic observation, they implicitly accept that idea. That some are very explicit about it, some are not, but they accept it. And so they said we got to go out there and we got to leave things as they are and observe them and see what we can find out. Well, there's another dimension of this question. As Bloomer thought about it, at least, Bloomer was interested in generic principles. One did not go out there to observe nuts or drunks, simply to be able to describe the nuts or drunks of Iowa City. He went out there to observe the nuts or drunks of Iowa City in order to formulate some general propositions about, quote, untoward behavior, shall we say, or some damn thing like that, like Edward Lemert did in his Paranoid Dynamics of Exclusion. So a lot of naturalistic observers are misrepresenting Bloomer when they say every situation is unique and it's a unique sort of. So now, back in terms of what I see, I don't see myself in any sense as being the person responsible for formulating an alternative to Herb Bloomer's formulation. I would give that credit to Manfred Kuhn. And one of the things that Kuhn taught was that we had to make systematic, sustained observation. I'm not sure you ever used that phrase. But you go out there and you get some data, bodies of data, and you analyze it, and you analyze it solely for the purpose of formulating general propositions. Now, Kuhn was a little mixed up, but that's okay. I mean, one of the things he had, one of the ideas he had was the self as an object that's part of all social encounters. That's true, sort of. And so he says, first starting point then is we got to learn how to observe the self. And that's why he got the TST, the 20 statements test, and that sort of thing. But the thing was, we were going to observe the self in order to make some general propositions about social conduct. We were going to take this data and we were going to formulate generic propositions. Okay, in that sense, Kuhn and Bloomer were on the same wavelength. Okay, now where they were on a different wavelength is Bloomer had what we might call a spectator's attitude, if you will. Namely, you sit back and you observe this and you try to be unobtrusive and all that kind of good stuff. Kuhn saw the Research Act as a much more interactive sort of thing. You do things to people. I mean, you do things to people when you hand out a questionnaire, for God's sakes. People don't go around writing out who am I answers unless you give them a questionnaire and ask them to do it. I mean, it's an intruding act, okay? You're an active part of that. Now, the mistake that Kuhn made is that he thought questionnaires would generate the kind of data necessary. And in that sense, he violated one of the basic ideas of interaction theory, namely that life exists in process. Okay? And it's all static. There ain't no human life. There ain't no social. We're all dead. So, in that sense, I see what I did as being kind of a merger of Kuhn and Bloomer, okay? Merger in the sense that how in the devil do you make the systematic, sustained observation of the social process, okay? I stress the word process, okay? That was the question. And I went on and I did field studies. I tried to do them. And I did questionnaire studies too. I just got overwhelmed out there. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And this was a long time ago, of course. And in those days, VCRs were pretty uncommon tools. but I heard about and learned about them, and I thought, maybe if we can make video recordings of human interaction, and now we can make sustained, detailed analyses of those recordings. But so it was an effort to get, if you will, data sets, and I'm using the term data sets pretty much the way the quantitative freaks use it, okay? Except my data sets are data sets that exist in recording as opposed to on records. And then one looks at those recordings and analyzes those recordings. And I see that as, to the extent I made a contribution, it stems to a large extent from that. And one other thing I'd add, I guess, right there, is the merger of recording technology with the laboratory procedures. They are not inherently connected to one another. One can use recording technology to do research without the lab. One can use a lab without recording technology. The merger of the two I think, makes it a very powerful technology. The other footnote I'd like to add is that I've never looked into the laboratory or recording technology as anything more or less than an instrument that enhances our observational acuity. How's that for a phrase? That's pretty neat.
Having made that acuity in the lab, to what extent have you, or are you aware of results identified in the lab, such as the elementary forms of social action? Okay.
Yeah.
How are you aware of those being found outside of the lab?
Well, certainly they've been found outside the lab lots of times. I mean, all you got to do is go out there and look, and you'll find them. They take these concepts and.
But I mean, have you brought the same acuity that you had in the lab onto the street? Not just you personally.
Yeah,
but
I know.
I mean,
yeah, sure. To a limited extent, yes. Yeah. An article by Katovich and Diamond in which they looked at selling time sharing, put in use the ideas that they had in the lab. I recently wrote an article with a guy named Mark Siegman on jocularity and sarcasm and social relationships, and those observations were at a place of work. And I see the frame of thought there as being very compatible with what we use in the lab.
okay. Just to back up a little bit, this section is on this idea or this notion of symbolic interaction, and I've got a couple questions here. Then I would like to follow on with this a nagging question that's associated with this business of limitation. Okay, but first, to back up, who would you consider as the most fundamental, the essential writings in the SI literature?
Oh, George Herbert Mead, and then Georg Simmel. But most interactions would not include Simmel, but I do. And to a lesser extent, I suppose, Charles Horton Cooley. I've never been impressed with Dewey. I mean, a lot of people are, a lot of interactions, but somehow Dewey's always left me cold. I've tried him several times. Then in terms of more recent people, of course, Herb Bloomer. I mean, and Bloomer perhaps more than the other person for the last, for that period during the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Was responsible for keeping the symbolic interaction tradition alive, if you will, within the social sciences. And nobody else was in the same. During that period, nobody else was in the same league with him. Manfred Kuhn did live longer. He might have got there, but I don't know.
How about persons outside of the United States?
None. Simmel, but he's an old timer.
I mean contemporary.
Contemporary. No. The thing about the Frenchman, God, no.
Let's stay with this just for a second. Hal, you were earlier mentioning to Hal about some studies that had been done by others out in the world, out of the lab, with at least at your suggestion, a similar acuity to what occurred in the laboratory. How about studies in other cultures?
None, to my knowledge.
Is that a problem? Does that concern you?
No. It concerns me in a sense, but I don't have any doubt about it. I know damn well if we go out there and do it, and we go out there and study interpersonal or intergroup negotiating amongst the Yak Islanders, we're going to find the same elements of association that we'll find doing it with Europeans. I've got no doubt. I have no more doubt than an astronomer has doubts about when the stars being basically spheres, okay? There may be a star out there in the shape of a cube, okay? Who knows? I doubt it like hell. And I doubt like hell that the principles of negotiating are going to be any different amongst the Thais as opposed to amongst the North Americanos.
So, seems to me that you're suggesting then that doing what you do is to focus on the principles of doing different sorts of things, be it negotiating.
Right. Different forms of social activity, okay?
Okay. Forms, for that matter.
Yeah.
Knowing what you take from similar. What about content? What about culture? What about feelings? I mean, those are the things that people may have similar forms to their feelings regardless of the particular idiosyncratic specifics of their culture. But what about that? It seems to me that there's something important about that.
Well, I think there really is something important about that, and I don't think we can take it on quite yet. I think amongst some of us, the phrase that we use is the form-content bond, okay? That there's certain content that adheres to certain forms, okay? And or maybe vice versa, I don't know. I'm not being very articulate, but I think it's a real critical issue. I mean, when you take strictly a formal analysis in terms of the form of interconnectedness, the form of relatedness between people, okay? The obvious example of this is that from a formal point of view, there's no difference between dictatorship of fascism or dictatorship of communism. They got different content, different ideologies, right? Different culture. But in terms of it's the form that's the important thing from the point of view of this Zamalian kind of thought. And that is the form that ultimately is going to impact on human experiences as opposed to the content. Now that is obviously not quite true, okay? I think the content does make some difference. The content does interact with forms. And, for example, the content of communism may be inherently antithetical to the form of dictatorship. One might advance that argument. Whereas the content of fascism is not inherently antithetical to dictatorship, okay? Those are questions that we've got to work out sometime down the line, but I don't know that we can work them out yet. I think we've got to get a better grasp of this whole business of form. What are the basic forms? We don't know that yet. We've done some pretty good work. I mean, we got some elements of association isolated pretty well, I think. But the ones that we have isolated pretty well, in my judgment, are simple social activities, like the Cooperative Act, the Conflict Act, maybe to a certain extent the interpersonal negotiating. But then when you start talking about forms of relatedness or relationships, just what the hell is friendship? Okay, what are the components of friendship? We don't know that yet. Okay, we got some ideas about what some of the components of dictatorship is or tyranny, but we don't know very well yet. Okay, and it's going to take a lot of research to spell that out with any kind of precision. The cliche I use is it's sort of like, we've been archaeologists and we found them, uncovered a Monopoly game. We didn't have the vaguest idea what the hell this thing had to do. We finally figured out it was a game. And we finally figured, hey, it starts at this thing called Go, whatever that is. And that's about where we're at in terms of what we found out. We've isolated the elements of association that constitute cooperative behavior. That's a starting point.
Certainly, and then the other ones you're arguing that you've discovered are built upon that, but is it possible that you're making a premature analytical separation between form and content?
It's possible. Yeah, obviously it's possible. I don't think so, but it's possible. See, and what most people are doing, they're studying content. The postmodernists, they're studying content, They're studying the content of movies and poems and God knows what, They're not studying forms of interconnectedness between people. And you go on and on. Students, anybody who's interested in ideology, they're studying content, if you will. Cultural themes, okay, that sort of thing. And I don't mean to imply that that's wasted effort. It might be worthwhile, and certainly you got to let the nuts run it out. I just don't think it, in terms of my interest, okay? My overriding interest for years and years have been formulating universalistic statements about social phenomena. That interest, I think, can best be served by focusing on form right now. Obviously, I think that. But I made a hell of a bet, about 30 years of my life on it.
Well, if there is such a thing as a form-content bond, it would seem to me that there could be some utility in attacking it by an analytical separating the two from either angle, be it by starting with form or with...
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm not sure of that. See.
Why is that then, I guess, is what I'm asking.
You may be right. I don't know. I can't answer that, Joe, other than saying that I made the bet that the form is the way to go. Okay.
It's not time to cash your chips in yet.
And I'm right. And I haven't lost all my chips. Okay. Still in the game.
Earlier I mentioned there's a nagging question I'd come back to, and it's related to symbolic interaction, the micro-interaction, the face-to-face. If indeed Mead's perspective on the micro level allows for each social meeting, each social situation to be a novel but mutual construction, okay? If that's fair to say that, then what could be an account to explain why there has been a historical limit on variety? And I'd point specifically to the 6 elements association. Why are there not 7?
It's a dirty trick.
Well, I don't mean it to be a dirty trick, but I think that the connection might be faced by an instructor, say, in an introductory course, who says, well, why did Couch stop
at 6?
6?
Well, that's simply our state of information or state of knowledge right now, okay? And that's sort of like saying there are only 4 elements of chemistry or something like that. I don't know how many elements of association there are. There are thousands of them, I dare say. And I say there are thousands of them. There are thousands of concepts that human beings can develop to refer to social phenomena that will allow us to do things about social phenomena we couldn't do before, okay? That doesn't mean they exist out there independent of human thought or anything like that, all right? It's sort of like saying, okay, prior to the telescope there were what? 5 planets in the solar system? Now there's what, 7, 8? I don't know. I can't remember.
Well, would it be fair then to say that when we talk about your 6 elements association, you're talking about that square called GO in that game that you found?
Yeah, right. Now, let me go on a second. when Copernicus formulated this theory of planetary movement, all right, he didn't have, those outer planets in his system, okay? When they put the outer planets in the system, the system he had stayed, quotes, comparatively speaking, intact. That's the way I feel about those 6 elements. I'm not saying there are 6 elements in any kind of final, dogmatic level or anything like that. And obviously, if we start doing the research in greater depth, greater persistence in terms of trying to get more precise kind of thing, I suspect there are other elements, okay? But and the 6 may be, the names may change and how they fit together may be modified and all that sort of thing. One of the people who worked very closely with me, Bob Hintz, for example, he says there's an opening to an opening. Well, I don't know what the hell an opening to an opening is, but he can hold forth on this. He talks about those elements. But these are elements from his point of view, as best I can understand him, underlie or foundation of these 6 elements. And I never been able to understand his position. I'm not saying that, but I've got a tremendous respect for Bob's analytic ability, and it may turn out he's got something, I don't know.
Moving in the other direction.
All right.
Okay. In your estimate, can symbolic interaction theory, theoretical orientation, what have you, be used to explain and understand macro issues without eventually resulting in psychological reductionism of the main players? If so, how can it be done and keep the philosophical and methodological essentials of SI?
Yeah. Well, it's a very complicated problem. Oh, that's a stupid statement. It's also true. Throw it at me again, Hal. I'm lost.
Okay. The idea, normally we see symbolic interaction used in a theoretical orientation for research design and such at micro level.
Right,
I mean,
right.
lots and lots of history there, rich studies. Is it possible to take this theoretical orientation to this concept of a macro issue?
All right. I'll try. Certainly when we did the openings research, we were very much on the micro level. I mean, the question that informed that research was, what are the elements of cooperative behavior? Okay, that's all we were interested in. I mean, that's not all we were interested in a big global sense. As far as that particular research endeavor was, that was our concern.
Now, cooperative behavior, for people that haven't seen that material or read that report, what you're talking about there is something that could appear, whether it's in a face-to-face,
Right. Oh, yeah.
it could appear through the
Telephone, right.
telegraph,
Right.
between
Sure.
nation
Right.
states,
Absolutely.
documents.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. But all we were concerned there was with that micro issue of the cooperative act. In no sense were we concerned with relationships in the way that term is usually used, or social structure. And that was a necessary thing to do, I think, simply to simplify our world so that we could analytically get on top of the phenomenon or the data we had. Now the question is, how do you move to a more complicated level, a more complex level? Okay? And in a general sense, we've tried to address that on occasion. We haven't addressed it very well yet. But certainly in the article by Mark Siegmer and myself, we try to address the relationship between jocularity and solidarity. Okay? Jocularity being a social act. People laughing together. When we use the term jocularity, we mean social jocularity, okay? Laughing in unison. When we use the term solidarity, we're talking about people having a, quote, shared history of having laughed together or been disgusted together or something together, okay? Acting in the present and projecting a future of continuing to act with one another somewhere on down the line. Now, so what we have here then is the jocularity is a very ephemeral activity. Laughter doesn't last very long. Okay? It comes and it goes. Now, solidary relationships, comparatively speaking, endure. Some of us have friends for years and years and years. Okay? So then what we got to do is we got to figure out some way of conceptualizing the interfacing between things like jocularity and solidary relationships. And I'm just using it as an illustration, okay? Now, the basic idea that we have, which I think is correct, is simply it's social acts of various sorts that create relationships. You've got to laugh with, or express disgust with, or act in unison with somebody else in order to create a solidary relationship. Now, once you've created that solidary relationship, then when you reconvene, we'll say, next weekend, the relationship informs the convening, the coming together. You're mutually aware. That's Joe, my friend. Okay? And Joe's aware, that's Hal, my friend. Okay. Now, when we convene, the act is contextualized by that relationship which endures, but then at the same time we may be jocular again with one another, okay? Which affirms that relationship. Or hopefully it affirms that relationship. We think of it as affirming it, right? So, so relationships are produced by social act, and then they must be affirmed from time to time with social acts, okay? So one of the big problems, the big and I think absolutely fascinating questions that sociologists or students of social science ought to be into is looking at the interfacing between various forms of social action and social relationships. Now, I'll give you a particular example of that. I've got this feeling, and it's really nothing more than a feeling, based on some crude observations, that the Exchange Act, me offering you $1 for your pen and you selling it to me, all right? That particular sort of thing is inherently antithetical to a solidary relationship. And when you and I start bargaining with one another, it probably erodes our solidary relationship. I don't know that.
Could I just follow that up very quickly, though? Because here is what I'm hearing. I'm hearing this sense that this notion of this term form
Right.
is a way to talk about multi-levels,
Right.
number one, but also number two, a way to address relationships that we often talk about as role. Relationships,
Oh, yeah.
property
Right,
associated with role.
right.
It seems to me that it's an easy way to get those confused. But the sense of form, the way you're using it in several examples now, is something that goes beyond the idea of just role and properties with role, and that this might be something that would be cross-cultural, therefore macro level, etc., etc.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
And let me just add right quick there. I have no real conception, no real problem with the concept role, other than the fact, as it is used in the sociological literature, it's a very static concept. And when I'm talking about relationships are only relatively constant. Your friendship with Joe is not the same as it was 6 months ago. Sure, that was not the same as it was 2 years ago. So it's when we talk about the idea of relationship as any kind of relationship as relatively constant, it's only relatively constant. It's
Are
continually
you suggesting the form is changing, or is the content
yeah,
of the
the
relationship
contents are changing, and its form itself is also
Form is
changing.
evolving?
The form is evolving too, and devolving. we fall out of friendships too, you know, I mean, they fall apart.
Yeah, certainly.
And certainly
Probably
romantic
happened to most of us.
Yeah, right. Romantic relationships, we know they explode. They don't just fall apart, they explode sometimes. I guess friendships explode too.
But there is an applied sense of universal pattern going on here.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
We'll need to go into that in a little more detail a little bit later on.
Okay.
A few moments ago, you mentioned, in terms of a form, talking about being disgusted at the same thing, or jocularity. And you could re-invoke either of that aspect of a relationship when people come together again. The form, of course, would be the same. Say you and I are mutually disgusted at something, and next week we get together, again we're mutually disgusted, and the following week I show up and I decide I'm no longer mutually disgusted with this, rather I am disgusted with something else that we used to both enjoy quite a bit. The form is still the same, but the content of the disgust has been altered.
And so it's going to impact on the form.
That's a possibility. I'm not denying that. I'm
Yeah,
just
right,
posing
sure,
that
sure.
as a...
Those are issues that we gotta address, you know?
Let me interject here, because when you used form there, were you talking about the relationship with the content and the way it was being discussed, or are we talking
Both.
now about
Both.
the relationship and the variety now? Is that
Both. See? On the one level, give me the benefit of the doubt for just a moment, okay? There is a social activity of the form of jocularity, okay? Namely, people yakking it up together, all right? When people laugh together, we say, hey, that's an instance of jocularity. It's a big form of activity.
Laughing together in unison about
Like-
the same
Yeah,
object.
right.
Just to clarify.
Right, okay. That's the form. Another form of activity is sarcasm. Okay, that's a social act, all right? Now, we can be sarcastic any place, if you will, within any relationship. Within tyranny, you can be sarcastic. I mean, you got a master and a slave. And the slave can be sarcastic towards the tyrant, right? He's liable to get his damn head chopped off. But he can commit the act of sarcasm, or initiate the act of sarcasm. If the master hears it and understands it, he's liable to suffer the consequences. Now, if he hears it, understands it, and doesn't suffer the consequences, okay? That act of sarcasm coming from the subordinate to the superordinate is a threat to the relationship itself, to tyranny. And that's why the damn master is going to react so rapidly, if you will. And it's because he sees it as a threat to the relationship. Now, so the point I want to get across here is that certain forms of activity are contradictory to certain forms of relationship. Now, on the other hand, I think certain forms, and the reverse is true, the opposite, the converse. And certain forms of activity are very compatible with certain relationships. People who are good friends, at least it seems to me, okay? You got a friendship relationship, okay? They use sarcasm all the time, it seems to me. At least a lot of them do. And it doesn't threaten the relationship. I mean, you and I have done it here today a few times. I mean, we've been sarcastic towards one another. It doesn't threaten our relationship. Well, we have a friendship relationship, so it's okay there. Now, you try to be sarcasm with your lover. You can be sarcastic with your friend, but I don't think you can be sarcastic with a lover. Okay? I think sarcasm is something that sort of goes along with what we might call friendship, or solitary relationship. But sarcasm, I don't know that it goes with a romantic relationship. I think it's kind of incompatible with a romantic relationship. That's been one of the things I'd like to get us, do a study on someday.
Well, you could certainly probably personally attempt to do something like that.
Sure. Yeah, you can do it. Yeah. So the act, So What I'm saying is any act is possible with any kind of relationship, okay? But now the consequences of an act within a relationship, I mean, we got to talk about the form, the two kinds of forms and how they mesh or don't mesh, if you will.
So Hal's been asking about these levels. That's what led into this
Yeah, so we're only talking about two
discussions.
so far.
Are you? It seems to me that you're talking about constellations of forms of activities that, in being together, they constitute particular types of relationships. So it seems like, any particular form of activity is built up on these forms of association. So we're talking about
Yeah.
levels embedded within levels,
Right. They're
increasing
nested within
complexity.
Yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
And Hal's mentioned the macro and the micro issue, and you've got a book entitled "Constructing Civilizations."
Yeah.
Civilizations would seem to be a term referring to some very large human products. Is that's symbolic interaction?
Damn right it is. Of course it is. It's an effort to move to the macro level with a frame of thought that I see as symbolic interaction. Most symbolic interactions have not attempted to move to that level. Some have, of course. And on that, I guess I accept the general idea that we're going to have to proceed from the bottom up rather carefully. If we're going to keep this idea of formulating generic principles in the forefront. Certainly I see the research we did on openings that I did with Dan Miller and Bob Hintz as being foundational research. In a real basic sense, everything else ties back to that. Everything I've done since then. That seems a little far-fetched, but it's true.
Just a quick feedback or what have you, an impression. It seems to me that this use of this word form, since Zimmel, it's used in a very unique sense. It seems to be used to link ideas and, as Joe was saying, these constellations of relationships that are really under intense investigation. It seems to be a way to talk about something that's coming in the future, a taxonomy of the future, where we could almost say, well, yeah, these are the peas with a black spot, these are the peas with a green spot, and here are two forms of peas or something.
Right.
And yet I've heard introductory students especially just going in circles about the use of the word form in sociology. So as a unique word, it's certainly very functional because we seem to be able to understand what is meant by it each time it's used in a little bit different way. You recommend that word continue on like that?
Yeah. Well, I don't see an alternative right now, let's put it that way. Okay? And the cliche that I use to characterize it is that it's a geometric frame of thought as opposed to an arithmetic frame of thought. The form business. I mean, statistical analysis is basically concerned with amounts, quantity, okay? And I'm not saying it's irrelevant for all things, because it's not, but it seems to me that this idea of geometric forms, but it's a different kind of geometric forms than what we think of in geometry per se, because geometry, at least as traditionally thought of, is static, it's timeless, okay? And here we're talking about forms that are dynamic, they're constantly moving.
Associated perhaps even with such term as cultural capital.
I'm not sure I can follow you on that, Al.
In that they're accumulations of cultural capital,
I
not
see.
necessarily mathematic at all.
Right,
They
okay.
can be geometric
Yeah,
very
right.
easily.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so it's a different kind of thinking that predominates. But see, it's not all that unique. I mean, certainly when Marx talked about exploitative relationships and that sort of thing, he's talking about form. When Durkheim's talking about division of labor and forms of solidarity, he's talking about form. And I think if you want to, be kind, you could give Max Weber credit for that too. He's talking about particular kinds of forms on a kind of a big macro level in Weber's case. But
Kind of in tapestries, in some cultures, there's an escape hole, and it seems to me that this word form is kind of an escape hole for sociologists, regardless of their level, and it seems to work. I mean, it makes sense.
It's a heuristic device.
It would seem.
very powerful.
Yeah.
So is Pythagorean theory. It's a heuristic device that allows you to do things you couldn't do otherwise. Very powerful. Okay.
We probably need to find how much film we have.